The delicate scent of gardenias, still clinging to the lace curtains, mingled with the faint aroma of freshly pressed linen from the wedding 2 days prior. My kitchen, usually a sanctuary of quiet mornings and the soft clinking of ceramic mugs, felt oddly charged, a stage set for an unspoken drama. Clara, my only daughter, sat across from me at the antique mahogany dining table, her posture a picture of newlywed bliss, a faint blush still on her cheeks, her eyes sparkling with the lingering euphoria of her recent nuptials. Her husband, Victor Thorne, sat beside her, his arm casually draped over the back of her chair, a smile too wide, too perfect, plastered across his handsome face. He exuded an almost theatrical charm, polished and a little too practiced, the kind that made you instinctively check your pockets. He was a venture capitalist, he'd announced with a flourishing wave of his hand at the rehearsal dinner, though the specific ventures always remained tantalizingly vague, shrouded in an aura of implied, unquantifiable success. I, Betty, at 62, had long since retired from the frenetic, often cutthroat world of corporate finance. For 35 years, I'd navigated the treacherous currents of Wall Street, first as an eager junior analyst, then a savvy portfolio manager, and finally, in my later years, as a senior compliance officer for a global investment firm. My days were a relentless cycle of dissecting intricate financial structures, identifying hidden risks, and, more often than not, uncovering the subtle, almost invisible threads of deception woven into glossy prospectuses and perfectly manicured presentations. It had honed my instincts to a razor's edge, training me to see beyond the surface, to distrust anything that seemed too good to be true, and to always follow the money. This ingrained skepticism, a survival mechanism honed in a world rife with predators and opportunists, had served me well throughout my career and, as I was about to discover, would now prove profoundly personal. When my beloved husband, Richard, passed away 2 years ago, he left me more than just a lifetime of cherished memories and a profound sense of loss that still, at times, felt like a physical ache. He left me septemillion. Richard, a brilliant, if somewhat eccentric software engineer, had meticulously diversified his early tech investments, quietly building a fortune that even I, with all my financial acumen, hadn't fully appreciated until his lawyer, a stoic, meticulous man named Mr. Abernathy, revealed the true extent of it. Richard had placed the vast majority of it in an obscure, multi-layered trust, under a name I'd never heard of, the Aurora Foundation, managed by a discreet, almost secretive firm in Zurich, Switzerland, with explicit instructions for its absolute privacy, until a specific trigger event, such as my dire need, or my own discretion to make it known. I hadn't told a soul. Not Clara, not Richard's elderly sister who lived in Florida, nor even my closest friends, Eleanor Vance and Margaret Chen. My reasoning was simple, born from years of observing human nature and the corrosive, often corrupting, power of sudden wealth. Money changes people. It changes how they see you, what they expect of you, and it can introduce an insidious shift in even the most loving relationships. I wanted to grieve Richard in peace, to rebuild my life at my own pace, and to live my golden years with a quiet sense of security, rather than be surrounded by requests, expectations, or the unwelcome attention that a sudden fortune could bring. I also harbored a deep-seated, if unspoken, concern about Clara. She was a kind, artistic soul, a talented ceramist whose hands could coax beauty from clay, but also, at times, a bit too trusting, too eager to see the best in everyone, especially those who lavished her with attention. And Victor, with his slick charm, expansive promises, and seemingly boundless energy, had certainly lavished her with attention since their whirlwind courtship 6 months ago. The wedding itself had been a beautiful blur. The soft glow of fairy lights in the garden, Clara's radiant smile as she walked down the aisle, the heartfelt vows. But even amidst the joy, small, almost imperceptible red flags about Victor had flickered in my peripheral vision. He'd talked a little too much about wealth, about scaling opportunities, about his vague international deals that always seemed just on the cusp of exploding into massive profits. There was a subtle dismissiveness in his tone when he spoke of my modest, comfortable life, as if it were a quaint artifact from a bygone era, an era he was destined to transcend. He possessed an unsettling eagerness to discuss not just Clara's future, but our family's collective financial potential, a subject I found inappropriate for a wedding reception. But Clara, swept up in a tide of infatuation, saw none of it. She saw only his charm, his ambition, his love for her. And I, wanting nothing more than her happiness, had pushed my misgivings aside, hoping my instincts were simply those of an overly protective mother. Now, here we were. 2 days later, the wedding confetti still lingering in the crevices of the porch, and Victor was sliding a thick, yellow legal envelope across my antique mahogany dining table. It was emblazoned with the imposing, almost aggressive, logo of a prominent downtown law firm, Thorne and Associates. I didn't touch it. I didn't blink. My expression remained neutral, a mask carefully cultivated over decades of poker-faced negotiations. "This is just something we thought would make things easier in the long run, Mom," Victor said, his oily smile never wavering, his gaze unwavering on my face. He leaned forward slightly, projecting an air of earnest sincerity that rang false to my trained ears. "You know, legal stuff, asset alignment, future planning for when we have kids." His words were smooth, practiced, like a well-rehearsed pitch for a venture fund I'd already decided to pass on years ago, noting its suspiciously high projected returns and vague underlying assets. Clara, beside him, beamed, nodding like a child eager to please, her eyes shining with blind trust. "It's just a formality, Mom." Victor's brilliant with finances. "We're setting up a trust for when we have kids, you understand, right?" Her innocent enthusiasm was a direct, visceral punch to my gut. She truly had no idea what was contained in that envelope, no concept of the game being played. My stomach twisted into a knot, a familiar sensation from my Wall Street days when I detected a whiff of impending malfeasance. The envelope was thick, heavy with legal paper, meticulously notarized, bound with a brass clip. The worst part, the part that sent a shiver down my spine, it had my name on it, not as a signatory to a simple family agreement, but as the primary party whose assets were to be aligned, managed, and, I suspected, ultimately transferred. He had no idea what he was reaching for. No clue of the $7 million hidden from the world. No one did. Not even my daughter knew I had inherited that fortune after Richard died, and I hadn't told a soul. Thank God. Thank God for that single, profound secret, because now I knew exactly what he was after. And he, the slick, confident venture capitalist, had no idea what I was truly capable of. I'd seen men like him before. Users, opportunists, snakes in expensive suits, preying on trust and ignorance, leaving a trail of financial devastation in their wake. My career had been built on dismantling their schemes. "Just take a look when you can," Victor added smoothly, rising to clear his plate with an air of dismissive finality, already moving on as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. He glanced at his watch. "We're off to our Hawaiian honeymoon tomorrow, early flight. But this will save time later. Just sign it when you get a chance." I didn't say a word. I simply watched them go, Clara waving goodbye with unbridled joy, her laughter echoing in the quiet house, Victor flashing one last unnervingly confident smile, a shark's grin. The moment the front door clicked shut, the carefully constructed composure I'd maintained shattered. My hands shook as I finally reached for the envelope, its innocent yellow color belying its sinister contents. Inside, in stark black ink, was a financial agreement drafted as if I had already agreed to allocate a significant portion, if not all, of my assets into a new family trust. Conveniently, the trust was to be managed exclusively by Victor himself, with a clause granting him shockingly broad discretionary powers over investments and distributions, with minimal oversight required. The language was dense, intentionally convoluted, designed to obscure its true purpose from anyone without extensive legal or financial training. It was a thinly veiled attempt to gain complete control over my finances, and by extension, my entire future. I wasn't just going to refuse the contract. That would be too simple, too direct. It would raise immediate red flags with Victor, making him retreat and potentially devise a more subtle, harder-to-detect scheme. No, my mind, sharp and tactical from years in the financial trenches, immediately began constructing a trap, an intricate digital spiderweb he'd never see coming. The bait, a carefully orchestrated fake transfer of a significant but not overwhelming sum, perhaps $100,000, into a publicly visible account under my name, designed to look like a recent, modest inheritance or a long-forgotten matured bond. The moment he tried to gain access to or withdraw what he thought was a new, easily accessible deposit, I'd be watching. Every click, every query, every attempted transaction, every move. I would document it all. But before I even got that elaborate plan into motion, before I could even draft the decoy financial statement, there was a sharp, insistent knock at my door. It was 9 a.m. the following morning, too early for a casual visit, too late for the postman. When I opened it, it wasn't Victor, nor was it Clara. It was his lawyer. In his hand, he held another contract, even thicker than the first. This one was labeled, in bold, ominous letters, Emergency Addendum, and it had my daughter's hurried, almost frantic, signature on it. The sight of that young man standing on my porch, holding a document that threatened to unravel my daughter's life, rattled me more than I wanted to admit. He looked surprisingly young, maybe late 20s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that seemed a size too big for his slight frame, as if he were still growing into it. His briefcase was clutched in one hand, the other already extended, a polite but firm gesture, as if this were just another polite transaction. His name, I remembered from a whispered conversation at the wedding, was Marcus Thorne, a distant cousin of Victor's, a recent graduate from a second-tier law school, clearly eager to make his mark in the family business. "Mrs. Sterling?" he asked, his voice smooth, practiced, almost an echo, as if reciting lines. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, my jaw tight. My gaze, however, was sharp, assessing. He was well-groomed, exuded a manufactured confidence, but lacked the genuine gravitas and seasoned intelligence of the legal professionals I'd dealt with for decades. He was a pawn, albeit a dangerous one, in a much larger game. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm here representing Victor and Clara Thorne regarding an urgent financial arrangement." I didn't move from the doorway, my body a silent barrier. "My daughter's name is Clara Maxwell," I said flatly, my voice a deliberate steel blade, cutting through his practiced formality. She didn't change it. He blinked, a flicker of surprise in his carefully composed eyes, quickly masked by a forced cough and a tightened smile. Of course. My mistake. A slight oversight in the rush of the wedding arrangements. "May I come in? This won't take long." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door, to sever this predatory connection immediately. My home was my sanctuary, and he was an unwelcome trespasser. But curiosity, and something sharper, a profound, almost desperate need to know just how deep this rabbit hole went, how far Victor was willing to go, and how much Clara might unknowingly be ensnared, made me step aside. He walked in like he owned the place, a preternatural confidence in his stride, setting his polished leather briefcase on my antique mahogany dining table, the same table where Clara used to do her homework, where Richard had taught her algebra, and I had helped her with college applications. Its polished surface, usually reflecting quiet family memories, now seemed to mirror the cold, hard glint of calculated greed. "This contract," he began, flipping open the case and withdrawing a set of glossy, heavy bond papers, "is what we're calling a precautionary measure. Victor and Clara have decided to combine their financial futures. Naturally. This includes any immediate family holdings that could benefit the trust and consolidate wealth for their future children." His voice was a monotone, reciting prepared lines, utterly devoid of genuine warmth. I didn't sit down. I remained standing across the room, my arms folded across my chest, my gaze unwavering, observing him as I would a rogue algorithm, searching for the glitch, the weakness, the hidden code. He continued, unfazed by my silence, his eyes fixed on the documents, avoiding mine. Now, Clara signed this document yesterday morning, before they left for their honeymoon. Victor asked that you add your signature before the end of the week, so it's all cleared before their return. A quick resolution, you understand. Before they get back? I raised an eyebrow, feigning a slight exasperation, as if his request were merely an inconvenience, a slight imposition on my retired life. Yes, it's really just a formal acknowledgement of the family alignment, a legal safeguard, essential for comprehensive estate planning, especially for a couple of their ambition. He offered another tight, practiced smile, a salesman's gesture. Cut the fluff, I said, my voice low, cutting through his practiced spiel like a scalpel through silk. Show me the section about the money, the real purpose of this visit. He hesitated, a fleeting shadow of discomfort in his eyes, then quickly turned the contract around and pointed with a manicured finger. Section 7.2, Parental Estate Disclosures and Pre-Inheritance Trust Structures. He paused, waiting for my reaction, anticipating protest, perhaps confusion. When none came, he continued, his voice regaining its false confidence. In plain English, Mrs. Sterling, you are being asked to pre-declare any large assets or expected funds so they can be considered in the equitable trust distribution model for the new family trust. It ensures transparency and fairness. I nearly laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that caught in my throat. They wanted my $7 million. They had no idea it even existed, yet they were trying to fish for it, casting a wide, greedy net, hoping I'd simply volunteer the information. My gaze drifted to the signature on the dotted line above mine. It was Clara's book. Her handwriting, usually so neat and deliberate, was rushed, almost frantic, as if she hadn't even read the document, blindly trusting her new husband, swept up in the romantic fantasy of their perfect future. It confirmed my worst fears. Victor had manipulated her, using her trust, her love, as a tool for his insidious agenda. He had no regard for her well-being, only for what she could facilitate him obtaining. Marcus Thorne closed the folder gently, his smile still tight, still unwavering, but a hint of impatience now in his eyes. This protects everyone involved, ma'am. Especially with today's economy and rising inflation. You know how important proper financial planning is. Victor is just being prudent, looking out for the whole family. Did Clara actually read any of this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it held a steel that made him flinch almost imperceptibly. My eyes bored into his, demanding honesty he seemed incapable of giving. He gave a forced cough, then repeated, his voice defensive now. They're young. They trust each other. Clara just wants to make sure Victor feels supported in building their future. Wrong answer, I said, stepping forward, my hands flat on the table, my voice gaining strength, echoing the authority I once commanded in countless boardrooms, facing down far more formidable opponents than this inexperienced young lawyer. Tell Victor he'll have to wait. I don't sign things without my own legal team reviewing them. And my legal team, Mr. Thorne, is far more thorough than yours. They tend to uncover every hidden clause, every buried intention. A flicker of genuine surprise, quickly masked by annoyance, crossed his face. He seemed to realize for the first time that I wasn't just an old woman to be easily brushed aside. I understand, ma'am, but Victor was hoping for a quick resolution before their return. Delays could be seen as uncooperative, perhaps even contentious, which could strain family relations. Tell him I'm uncooperative, then, I said, my voice chillingly calm, a quiet threat in its tone. And tell him that straining family relations is the least of his worries if he continues down this path. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a call to make to my attorney. And you, Mr. Thorne, have a message to deliver. He tried to argue, to push for a definite date, to push the contract towards me, but my demeanor had shifted irrevocably. The sweet, slightly weary, retired widow had vanished, replaced by the formidable compliance officer who could spot a lie a mile away and wasn't afraid to call it out, who understood the intricate dance of legal threats and counter-threats. He gathered his papers, defeated, the thick contract still clutched in his hand, and retreated from my home. The moment he was gone, the silence in the house felt like a physical weight. I picked up my phone. My fingers, accustomed to dialing under pressure, flew across the keypad. "Eleanor? It's Betty Maxwell. I need your expertise. It seems my daughter married a viper, and he just tried to stick his fangs into my bank account. And Clara, bless her heart, signed his bait." Eleanor Vance, a formidable litigator specializing in financial fraud and elder protection, was a woman I had known for decades. We'd crossed paths many times during my corporate career, often on opposite sides of a complex deal or a regulatory dispute, but always with mutual respect for each other's intellect and unwavering integrity. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail, her razor-sharp legal mind, and her unshakable ethical compass. "Betty, it's been too long," she exclaimed, her voice warm, but quickly turning serious as I outlined the unfolding situation with Victor and the insidious contracts. A pre-inheritance trust? Post-wedding? With a honeymoon underway? This smells worse than a dead fish in July, Betty. Get me every scrap of paper they left, every email, every text message, every single interaction you've had with him, and for God's sake, do not sign a single thing. Over the next few days, while Clara and Victor basked in the Hawaiian sun, completely oblivious, Eleanor and I worked tirelessly. I provided Eleanor with every detail I could recall, every nuanced observation about Victor's overly smooth mannerisms, his vague business boasts, his subtle dismissiveness. My hidden inheritance, the $7 million Richard had so carefully shielded, was finally revealed to Eleanor, not as a source of wealth for me to flaunt, but as the primary, unspoken target of Victor's scheme, and the ultimate reason for my extreme caution. Eleanor's eyes widened, a rare display of genuine surprise that quickly morphed into professional grimness. "Betty, this changes everything. He's not just after a comfortable life or even a quick payout. He's trying to engineer a full-scale financial takeover. This is systematic predation." My covert skills kicked into high gear, resurrected from their decades of dormancy. I didn't need to break laws. I just needed to leverage my extensive network and knowledge of the financial underworld. I accessed publicly available records, but with a deeper, more analytical approach than any amateur. I cross-referenced names, addresses, corporate registrations. Victor's venture capital firm, Sterling Thorne Investments, was barely a year old, registered in a P.O. box in a nondescript office park in Delaware, a notorious haven for shell corporations. Its portfolio was a ghost, a series of paper companies with no real assets, no verifiable business operations, no discernible revenue streams. His claimed successful exits were phantom deals, press releases with no follow-up, no paper trail, no verifiable returns for supposed investors. I uncovered a string of previous failed businesses, numerous bankruptcies artfully concealed through name changes and corporate restructuring, and a recurring pattern of short-term, opportunistic ventures that left a trail of disgruntled investors and unpaid creditors across 3 states. There were even 2 previous marriages, both hastily annulled, with divorce records carefully sealed, but hints of bitter financial disputes lingered in obscure county court dockets. Victor Thorne wasn't a venture capitalist. He was a professional con artist, a financial predator who preyed on vulnerable women who were either wealthy themselves or, crucially, connected to wealth. Clara, with her trusting nature and my presumed comfortable widow status, was just his latest mark. The most chilling discovery came from a former colleague, a retired forensic accountant I trusted implicitly, a man who could find a needle in a haystack of financial data. He found a dormant LinkedIn profile belonging to Victor, under a slightly different name, Victor Stone, with a past employment history that included a brief, tumultuous stint at a notorious boiler room operation in Miami, a firm famous for running pump-and-dump schemes on unsuspecting retirees. The profile was quickly taken down after my colleague's subtle inquiries. But the screenshot was captured, dated, and irrefutable evidence of a past Victor desperately wanted to bury. This wasn't just about bad investments, it was about outright fraud. Eleanor's legal team, meanwhile, uncovered equally damning legal evidence. The emergency addendum was indeed designed to trick me into acknowledging and then forfeiting my assets. Section 7. 2. Parental estate disclosures and pre-inheritance trust structures was a cunningly worded clause that, if signed, would have bound me irrevocably to disclose all assets, including private trusts, and then to transfer them into Victor's complete control for equitable distribution within the new family trust. It was a legal trap, meticulously crafted, leaving me with little to no recourse once signed. It effectively made me a ward of Victor Thorne, entirely dependent on his discretion for my own funds. "This is not just about your money, Betty," Eleanor stated grimly during one of our strategy sessions, her fingers drumming on the polished conference table. "He intends to strip Clara bare eventually, too, once he controls your assets. He's a professional manipulator. He's already got her signature on this addendum, which is truly heartbreaking. She's completely blind to his true nature." My heart ached for Clara, for her innocence, for the devastating betrayal she would soon face. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance. It was about saving my daughter from a life with a dangerous, calculating man. The emotional stakes were astronomical. Clara's happiness, her security, her fundamental trust in the world, all were on the line. Victor and Clara were due back in 5 days. I prepared my counterstrike. Eleanor advised against a direct, emotional confrontation without Victor physically present, and without all legal protections firmly in place. Our plan was to lure him into a meeting under the guise of cooperation, to let him believe he was winning, and then, at the precise moment, spring the trap, revealing the full extent of his depravity and the depth of my knowledge. The call from Victor came the moment his plane touched down at SeaTac. "Mom, Betty, we're back!" So refreshed. Hawaii was incredible. "Did you get a chance to look at those papers? We're so excited to get everything finalized." His voice was brimming with false cheer, a predatory eagerness thinly veiled beneath layers of manufactured enthusiasm. "Yes, Victor," I said, my voice calm, almost cordial, betraying none of the turmoil within me. "I've reviewed them with my own counsel, Eleanor Vance. She has a few clarifications. Nothing major, I hope, but you know Eleanor. She's meticulous. I suggested we all meet, say, Wednesday morning, at Eleanor's office. You and Clara, Marcus, Eleanor, and myself." A beat of pregnant silence stretched across the phone line. He hadn't expected me to have a lawyer, let alone Eleanor Vance, whose reputation preceded her. "Eleanor Vance? That's quite thorough, Mom Betty," he finally managed. A new, subtle edge of caution in his tone, a hint of unease. He likely thought I was just being an overly protective, slightly eccentric mother, bringing in a lawyer for a minor review of standard documents. He couldn't have imagined the depth of what I knew, the extent of the web I had spun around him. "Yes, of course. Wednesday. Clara will be there too." He still sounded confident, but the tremor was there, a hairline fracture in his otherwise perfect facade. The meeting was set. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m., at Eleanor Vance's sprawling, impeccably modern office in downtown Seattle. The conference room was vast, glass-walled, with a panoramic view of the bustling city below, a stark contrast to the small, intimate dramas that unfolded within its walls. The air was thick with unspoken tension, almost palpable. Victor, radiating a forced confidence in a crisp designer suit, sat beside Clara, who looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting anxiously between us, sensing the unspoken conflict. Marcus Thorne, Victor's young lawyer, was there too, looking smug and overly eager, ready to defend what he probably considered a simple, if aggressive, asset consolidation strategy. And opposite them sat Eleanor, a granite-faced statue of legal authority, her expression unreadable, and myself, outwardly calm, my hands clasped loosely in my lap, but inside, a storm of resolve was brewing. Eleanor began, her voice crisp, professional, cutting through the strained pleasantries Victor attempted to initiate. "Good morning, gentlemen. Clara, let's dispense with the pleasantries. We've reviewed the documents you presented to Mrs. Maxwell, both the initial financial alignment agreement and the subsequent emergency addendum. And frankly, Mr. Thorne, your strategy is transparent, deeply unethical, and verging on criminal. Marcus Thorne bristled, his young face flushing. Objection! Miss Vance, my client's intentions are entirely honorable. This is a common practice for newly married couples. Family asset consolidation for future planning. Perfectly legal. Consolidation? Eleanor scoffed, her voice laced with disdain, echoing off the glass walls. Or expropriation? Let's be very clear. Section 7.2 of your emergency addendum is not a disclosure agreement. It is a meticulously crafted forfeiture clause. It attempts to bind Mrs. Maxwell to disclose and then irrevocably transfer her entire estate, including any private trusts and undisclosed inheritances, into a trust entirely controlled by Victor Thorne. A trust from which she, Mrs. Maxwell, would have no independent access, no voting rights, and no control over her own funds. This is not about family alignment. It is a calculated attempt at grand larceny through deception, targeting an elderly woman and her trusting daughter. Victor's face, usually so composed, paled visibly. His perfect smile flickered, a deep crack appearing in his carefully constructed facade. He looked at Marcus with a furious, silent question, a desperate plea for reassurance that his plan wasn't falling apart. Furthermore, I interjected, my voice cutting through the rising tension, calm and steady like a cold, clear stream. Victor, you seem to have a pattern of aligning assets. My attorney and I have uncovered numerous irregularities in your past ventures, shell companies with no substance, undisclosed bankruptcies, a documented history of failed partnerships where investors mysteriously lost everything, leaving you unscathed. And your personal history is equally revealing. I pulled out a folder, placing it gently on the polished table, its contents visible to all. I have here certified documents from state registries and court records detailing your previous legal names, including Victor Stone, and a brief but illuminating employment history with a firm known for illicit financial activities in Miami. It seems your venture capital career began in a boiler room, running pump and dump schemes on unsuspecting retirees. Victor gasped, a visible tremor shaking his entire body. His eyes, usually so confident and manipulative, darted frantically to Marcus, then to Clara, then back to me, filled with a raw, desperate fear I had never seen on his face. This is ridiculous. Slander, she's making this up. You can't believe her, Clara, he blustered, his voice cracking, losing its smooth cadence. Clara, who had been sitting frozen, stunned by the unfolding drama, her face a mask of bewilderment, finally spoke. Mom? What are they talking about? Victor? What is she saying? Her voice was small, bewildered, her eyes wide with hurt and dawning horror, fixed on her husband, desperate for him to deny the accusations. Clara, darling, it's nothing, Victor began, trying to take her hand, his voice a frantic whisper, but she recoiled from his touch, her gaze fixed on me, pleading for an explanation, for truth. It's everything, Clara, I said, my voice gentle but firm, unwavering. Victor didn't marry you for love, sweetheart. He married you because he thought I, your mother, was a wealthy, naive widow, and he intended to steal everything I had. And in the process, he was setting you up to be just as financially vulnerable as me, bound to a trust he controlled, with no independent assets of your own. He was going to use your future, your children's future, as leverage for his own insatiable greed. I then pulled out my phone, a small, unassuming device, and played an audio recording. It was a call I had intercepted, using old, perfectly legal methods from my compliance days. A subtle, encrypted call-forwarding trick I'd applied to his public-facing business line, knowing how careless men like him could be. The recording was clear, Victor's voice unmistakable. He was boasting to a shady associate about his new mark, Clara and the sweet $7 million score he expected from the old lady. He even discussed manipulating Clara into signing over her own future earnings once he had control of my, non-existent to his knowledge, publicly declared assets. He outlined his plan to discard Clara once he had drained everything he could. The silence that followed the recording was deafening, punctuated only by Clara's strangled, heartbroken sob. Her face, once radiant with newlywed bliss, crumbled before our eyes, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide with a horrific, soul-crushing realization. She looked at Victor, then back at me, the picture of shattered trust, a dream obliterated. "This is illegal!" Victor shrieked, finally losing all composure, abandoning his seat and leaping to his feet, overturning his chair with a crash. "You can't record me! This is an invasion of privacy. I'll sue you." "On the contrary, Mr. Thorne," Eleanor interjected, her voice icily calm, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "As a public-facing business line, your calls were subject to standard regulatory monitoring, a fact conveniently outlined in your own firm's terms of service, which you, as CEO, would have signed yourself. Furthermore, the evidence, however obtained, reveals intent to commit multiple felonies, wire fraud, grand larceny, and systematic deception. The ethical implications alone are enough to disbar your cousin Marcus for complicity and negligence. As for you, Victor, your brazen admission of criminal intent is now on record, with multiple witnesses. I suggest you reconsider your options very carefully." Marcus Thorne, whose face had gone from smug to a sickly green, quickly interrupted, his voice trembling. "Victor, I strongly advise you to remain silent. We need to discuss this privately. You're only making things worse." He clearly saw the writing on the wall. His own fledgling career was on the precipice of ruin. "There's nothing to discuss," Clara said, her voice trembling but gaining strength, a new steel entering it that I hadn't heard before. She looked at Victor, her eyes filled with a searing, heartbroken fury, but also a newfound resolve. "It's over, Victor. You're a monster. I want an annulment. I want nothing to do with you ever again. Get out of my life." Victor, seeing his carefully constructed world collapsing around him, snarled, a guttural sound of pure rage, and lunged towards Clara, but Eleanor's large, stern security guard, a former police officer she always had on standby for such meetings, stepped swiftly between them, blocking his path. Victor, cornered and desperate, mumbled incoherent threats, his handsome face now contorted into an ugly, animalistic snarl, all charm gone, replaced by raw malevolence. "Mr. Thorne," Eleanor said, her voice now dangerously low, cutting through his rage, "I suggest you leave now, immediately, or I will be forced to call the authorities. I assure you, the evidence we have is more than sufficient for a full criminal investigation. Your choice." Victor, realizing there was no escape, his meticulously crafted plan shattered, turned and stormed out of the office, his cousin Marcus scrambling after him, muttering desperate apologies and pleas for him to calm down, to reconsider. The silence that fell after they left was heavy, thick with the weight of raw emotion, of broken trust and profound relief. Clara, the brave facade finally gone, collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I knelt beside her, my heart aching with a mother's pain, pulling her close, rocking her gently like I used to when she was a small child. "It's over, my sweet girl," I whispered, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. I am so sorry you had to go through this." "Why, Mom!" she choked out through her tears, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "How could I have been so blind, so stupid?" "Love makes us blind sometimes, sweetheart," I replied, my own eyes welling up with tears of empathy and relief. "It makes us want to believe the best in people, especially when we want something so badly. But sometimes, a mother's instincts, honed by years of protecting her loved ones, see what love obscures. And sometimes, you just get lucky enough to have secrets of your own. Secrets that can shield you when you need them most." I paused. Then softly, cautiously, I told her about the $7 million. about Richard's meticulous planning to keep it private, about my reasons for keeping it a secret, even from her. Clara listened, her tears slowly subsiding, replaced by a profound sense of shock, then understanding. "You did it to protect me, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice a fragile breath. I nodded. "From people like Victor, from greed, from what money does to people, from the very expectations and manipulations that can poison relationships. I wanted to give you the freedom to choose your life, your love, without that kind of pressure or influence." The annulment was swift and painless, given the clear, irrefutable evidence of fraud and misrepresentation on Victor's part. Victor Thorne faced a barrage of civil lawsuits from his past victims, whose cases Eleanor's firm unearthed with ruthless efficiency. He disappeared from public view, his reputation ruined, his insidious schemes finally brought to light. He found no more naive marks. Justice, though slow and painful, had a way of finding its mark. The aftermath was long and difficult, especially for Clara. She went through a period of deep sadness, of questioning her judgment, of grieving not just the loss of a relationship, but the profound betrayal of trust. The shame of being so thoroughly deceived weighed heavily on her, but with the gentle guidance of a compassionate therapist and with my unwavering, unconditional support, she began to heal. Our relationship, tested by secrecy and devastating revelation, became stronger and more profoundly honest than ever before. She saw me not just as her mother, but as a protector, a wise counsel, a silent guardian who had, quite literally, saved her future. She learned to trust her own instincts more, to look beneath the surface, to discern true character from charming facade. She rediscovered her own strength, her own resilience. We often talked, sitting in my kitchen over steaming mugs of coffee, just like that fateful morning after her wedding. We discussed finances openly, something we hadn't truly done before. I taught her the principles of financial vigilance, the importance of independent counsel, the subtle warning signs of manipulation, the value of skepticism. She learned, not just intellectually, but from the raw, painful experience of almost losing everything. She began to pursue her ceramics with a renewed passion, channeling her pain into her art, creating pieces that were both beautiful and imbued with a quiet strength. The $7 million remained securely invested, a silent, powerful anchor, providing not just financial security, but a profound sense of peace. It was a legacy of Richard's foresight, a testament to my own quiet vigilance. It allowed me to support Clara not just emotionally, but practically, helping her set up her own expanded studio, providing the seed money for her to build her true artistic career, free from the shadows of Victor's predatory influence. My life, at 65, was not what I had imagined it would be after retirement. It was richer, more complex, imbued with the hard-won wisdom of a battle fought and won. I had learned that the greatest inheritance isn't just money. It's the wisdom gleaned from experience, the vigilance to protect what truly matters, and the courage to face painful truths, even when they come from those you love. It's about empowering yourself and your loved ones to see clearly, to build lives based on genuine trust and integrity, not illusions crafted by manipulative opportunists. True wealth, I discovered, lies not just in assets, but in secure relationships, in fierce loyalty, and in the quiet, unshakable strength of a mother's love. I never regretted keeping my secret. It was the shield that protected my daughter, the silent weapon that disarmed a predator, and ultimately, the foundation upon which we rebuilt our lives, stronger, wiser, and more genuinely connected than ever before. It was the kind of victory that money alone could never buy.